So here's our map FIS exercise example. So we're going to run through some sample questions. They're not really questions as much as they are scenarios, but the idea is to see more than one item from the questions. So, find the floodway base flood elevation at cross-section A of Rocky River on both the firm and the FIS. So, I'm using panel 38, and I've made it a little bit bigger here so you can see it. So we'll work this together. So going back to the question, we want to find the floodway base flood elevation on both the firm and the flood insurance study. So here's my firm. So the very first thing to do is what? Find Rocky River. That's the most important thing. Boom, there it is. Now keep in mind, flood insurance rate maps aren't the most user-friendly ones. They're not colorful, they don't have a lot of information, they don't have a lot of roads. You know, it's not your AAA map that you go and get to be able to go somewhere. So, as obvious as it seems, or as simple as it seems, finding the actual river is one of the biggest steps. So I found Rocky River. So I wanted to find cross-section A. So what do? I start, there's the river, so I start going up, and I'm like, oh, look at that. Hexagons, letter A. There's my cross-section. Okay, so what did I say I wanted to know? The base flood elevation in the floodway. So knowing that the floodway is designated between these lines and the diagonal lines, and if I forget what that is, what do? I look at the legend, it reminds me, yes, that is indeed the floodway. And I go, okay, so that's the point I want. I want the base flood elevation in the floodway at cross-section A. Does everybody see what I'm doing here? If you don't see, it's okay. Put your hand up and we'll walk through it. So when I look at that, I say, okay, how can I determine what that number is, what that elevation number is? So I found the 10, because remember that little wavy line with the number above it was my elevation on the firm, not the FIS, on the firm. And I know that here's a 10, but I don't know what direction that's going, so what do I have to do? I have to go find the next one, and there it is. It's a 10. So for all intents and purposes, it's 10. On the on the firm, I could say that my base flood elevation is 10. Now, that's for the firm. Now, why didn't I use that cross-section? There's cross-section A. Uh-oh, we did something wrong. What did we do wrong if we use this cross-section? Right. That's not on Rocky River. That's on Cobb Brook. Make sure you look at that, because if your eyes just go to the first hexagon with the letter A, and you're like, oh, this is easy, this is a piece of cake, you're wrong. So then that whole question you've answered is wrong, and any subsequent questions you may answer are wrong. Basically, I show this to you because you can have multiple cross-sections with the same letter on the same map. And why? Because they're on different rivers. This is Rocky River, this is Cobb Brook. Don't get the two confused. Whoops, let's go back to that. Don't just come here and go, oh, look, there it is, this is easy, A. I'm just going to jump in here. Make sure you look for the actual river that it's asking you for, because then that's the one I want to use. There's my 10 numbers. I don't want to use that one because it's on Cobb Brook. Now, what else did I ask about that? I wanted to know what it was on the firm. I got 10, but the firms are what? They're rounded. So I want it on the profile. So I check my profile. So I've got multiple sources here that I can look for. I go in my flood insurance study. I got the profile, and I'm also going to look at what in the flood insurance study? The floodway data table.
Why would you look at both?
Just to double check and confirm. Because for my question here, I asked you what it was in the floodway. I could have asked you the same thing where it wasn't in the floodway, where you used the profile, but not necessarily the data table.
But you said FIS or firm.
No, I said both. I want to know both. But that's a good point. So let me go back. My original question was find the floodway BFE. So floodway leads me to, I want to look on the floodway data table because that's where that's delineated. I could have just said the BFE at another point. And you could see questions like that too, where it may not necessarily be in the floodway.
So the cross-section A in my floodway base, which one of the floodways would I pick?
Well, I'm going to show you.
Regulatory?
Well,
So the floodway data is that other reference sheet.
right. So let me show you. So we get to that. So here's our profile. So if I want to work it on the profile, I'm working the profile here because now my question asked me for in the floodway. So I'm still going to look at the floodway data table. If it wasn't in the floodway, do I need to go to the floodway data table? No, I can just get it from the profile.
Where do you get your, I'm sorry, I can't see it. Where do you get your information from here?
I'm going to show you that in a minute. I just want to make sure everybody understands why we're looking at three different things. We're looking at the firm.
Why am I looking at the profile when I've got the data right here? Why would I bother measuring?
Because the question asks you for the floodway. Now, right, you could go straight to that. The reason I'm showing you this is because if the question doesn't say floodway, that doesn't help you.
Okay.
You follow? So I want to make sure everybody's clear on this. Let's go back here to see the question. It says find the floodway BFE. See, you may have thought that word was just incidental, but that word is really important because if I just said find the BFE at cross-section A, I'm not necessarily talking about in the floodway. Since I said floodway, Kurt's right, I could go right to the floodway data table after I finish the firm, and I don't have to look at the profile. But if the question would have said find the BFE at reference point, whatever, and if it wasn't in the floodway, that's when I have to go to the profile because the floodway only helps me where?
Cross-section.
In the floodway. Yes.
So the answer to that would be on the firm, the base flood elevation is 10.
10.
And at the floodway data, or
We're
the
still working
flood
on that.
insurance.
We're still working on that.
Okay.
So if I want to see this on the profile, because once again we use the profiles, if it's not in the floodway, on the profiles, all my sections, my cross sections are down at the bottom. Everybody see where I'm at? And it says cross section. Yeah, that's the other thing. Make sure you're using the right profile.
Okay.
Because guess what? Just like there's a Rocky River and Cobb Creek on the map, there's a profile for Cobb Creek as well. So make sure you're using the right one. So if in doubt, guess what? It tells me what the cross section is down here in the legend. So there's cross section A. I'm following cross section A up. The lines are kind of hard to see. They're kind of hard to see in real life too on the profiles. But you come to a point so you're able to say cross section A. If I want to know the 100-year flood, I make sure I'm looking at the right line. There it is. It's right at the 10 mark. So I'm more or less getting that same number from using my profile.
How do you know to look at that line and not all those?
Because I asked, well, and that's a good question. She asked, how do I know what line to look at? Because I asked you for the 100-year flood. In the question, the original question, I said, what was the 100-year flood? And see, there's 4 different ones here, 10, 50, 100, or 500 years.
Oh, okay, I see.
And then the line is essentially different. So I'm looking at the 100-year, which is
straight.
solid and 2 dots.
Gotcha.
That's a
Okay.
good question, though,
So
because
the information is going to be in the floodway data. It's going to be there for me.
it is because it's in the floodway. The question said floodway. Keep in mind, this goes back, and they even tell you if you've read anything at the ASFPM website, they said make sure you read the question because, like in this question, that one word that you thought was just an adjective descriptor is the essence of the whole question because it's in the floodway. If I had left floodway out of that question, this is exactly where we'd be getting our answer from. Likewise, going back to her question, if I would say what's the 500-year flood, I need to make sure I'm looking at the right line here. Because every one of these lines is different based on the flood, 10, 50, 100, or 500. Does everybody follow that part? 10, 50, 100, 500. Goes back to what we just said earlier, the odds of a 500-year flood are less than a 10-year flood. When you relate that to the geographic height in water, it's relative here too. I have a better chance of getting a 10-year flood, which could come to what, 5, 6 feet or so, than I do the 500-year flood, which is like at 11 or 12 feet. Keep in mind, these, while they look tricky, they're just graphic representations of the cross profile of that water and how high it could get on any given time. Also notice, if anybody ever asks you about special features that might be related to the map, they also show up here, like a culvert. One of the other ways of double checking yourself is, this is at the confluence of Cobb Brook. Everybody know what the confluence is? Where two rivers meet. That's an important term to memorize. The confluence is where two rivers meet. The reason that's important here is you can double check yourself, because we'll see a picture of the map again on the next slide, to say, okay, am I looking at the right cross section and I'm in the right geographic area? So let's look at our floodway data table now. And we could have, as Kurt said before, we could have just gone directly to the data table because we knew the question said in the floodway. I wanted to show you the profile too, though, because if the question one that said floodway, this would not answer our question. And sure enough, cross-section A, I want to use the regulatory number, and it's 9.9. Now, on the profile, you really couldn't get that because it kind of looks closer to 10s. That's why if we ask for the regulatory number at cross-section A from the floodway data table, or it's in the floodway, that's the number we want to use.
So Mike, the other sheet, that was the profile.
This is the profile.
That's the profile.
Yeah.
And then the one with the numbers and the rounding, that's called the floodway data.
This one is the floodway data
The
table.
other one is the profile.
So the big thing to remember is I can always have a profile, but I may not have a floodway data table, or I may not need to use it in the question if I'm not in the floodway. Because I can still gain a lot of information from this profile that may not be on this table. This is like this drills down to my finest detail. I can't get anything that's more detailed than the floodway data table. So you figure, think about working it from firm to profile to floodway data table. I may not always need to go to that level of detail, but that's one that gives me the most. As Kurt was saying, if I know that I need that much detail, I may just skip right to the floodway data table to save time.
That's the question.
Yeah, but you've got to read the question. Are we asking questions in the floodway, or are we just asking profile questions? Because once again, the floodway doesn't dictate everything that's in the floodplain. Joe?
So does it relate where it says with floodway on that table, where it says 10 across, does that relate at all to the original question of where we got the 10 initially?
They'll ask you, there's a really delving in-depth description in 480 and in the flood insurance. It doesn't necessarily, because what they'll ask you for is what that column is based on. This is our regulatory. This is the one we always want to use for BFE. They could say, in an area without the floodway, what is the number? That kind of gets confusing. I don't want anybody to get too confused, because then you're talking about specifics, because those are the questions. If you see a question like that, I would challenge it. If somebody says, what is the BFE in the floodway without a floodway? You know, now if they said in the without floodway column, it's one thing, but if they said, what is the BFE in the floodway without the floodway? You'd be like, what? That doesn't make sense.
My question a while ago was, as you see as the letters go down in higher number, you see that the regulatory 9.9 goes to 10 to 11 to 12 to 13. Are we going upstream, going downstream? Can you determine by that?
Well, here they tell you it's the feet above county boundary. So my thought would be, if I'm just looking at this information, I would say as I move farther away from the original reference point, the beginning of Rocky River, that since the height becomes higher, that there's a change in elevation as I go.
Right.
Only because I'm noticing that I'm required to build higher if I build something. Correct. Yeah. So there's a change in elevation, so that my river may be going down some, the depth is getting more, and I know that I have to build higher to meet that change.
So point A on Rocky River in Flood County is the start of where that river starts in Flood County. Or it could be the end.
In this situation, yes, but that's not always true because you have to look at where the delineation is, where it's coming from, and I'll show you a graphic of why it's true on this one. But that kind of information you're always able to capture from your map because it'll either say from a point of origin, from the confluence, from the beginning of the river, etc.
Mike, I have
Yeah.
a point about that. If you look at the profile, actually A is closer to downstream of the other numbers.
Which one?
If you look at the profile, see on the top left, it says downstream. So the river's running right to left.
It says downstream flood elevations controlled by Atlantic Ocean.
Right. Is that what that means? Is that it's running right to left?
That's one of those. That's one of those special notations that you may not see on every flood profile. That's just specific that they felt it was necessary to note on that. But that's a good catch because that's fair game for anything that somebody could ask you about that say, hey, how are the downstream flood elevations controlled in Rocky River? You'd be like, what? You'd have to look and see that special notation.
And another thing, I work with you all the time, those are elevations, not actually depths, right? So,
Correct. Yeah, because these are elevation in feet.
So if you go back to the floodway data for a second. So actually that regulatory number being 14 feet would indicate you're going downstream as you go from K to A because your level, right? I mean, it's an absolute elevation.
Right, so let's say if you went the whole way to K, I don't have K on here, but if you go up, see how these go up? So yeah, you're right, because as you go up to that number, that requirement,
C is 11 feet.
right. But now keep in mind, and I'm interpolating now, that may go farther here because K and all that's going to be over here on the wall, but that's where my 14 may arise from. Yeah,
That's what I mean. Like we have to deal with it a lot. That somebody may give us say the flood's going to go to 14 feet, but your ground datum may be 8 feet, so you actually have 6 feet of water.
Right. Right, yeah, and that's a good point. Thanks for clarifying, because maybe I didn't clarify that enough. That doesn't mean that the ground is going to be at 14 feet. It may mean you have that difference, whatever it is, 8 or 6 feet in water at the flood, not necessarily ground height. So, and we're still revisiting the same area, so don't feel like I'm trying to leave you behind. And if anybody felt or feels left behind, let me know. We can still cover this. So where is the limit of the floodway located in our little example here? Where do I find that? Do I find that in the firm or the FIS? Think about what I'm trying to determine. I'm trying to determine the limit of something in a big geographical picture. Where would I look?
FIS.
Yeah, if I want to find something on a location, geographic location, I'm going to look at the firm. The FIS may give me detailed numbers, give me distances, measurement, height, elevations, etc. But if I want the location, so there's two ways that I can look for the beginning or end of my floodway. One of which is I look on the map to see where that diagram line stops.
What was the question again? Where's the floodway in?
What is the limit of the floodway? So where is the limit of the floodway located? So think about what some of these questions we're asking. So I can either look at the floodway and say, okay, I got to find out where it is, or guess what? Sometimes we even point it out and say limit of the floodway. So, don't get caught up in the complexity of this because some of this is actually quite simple. And see where it falls? It's like, okay, I can follow the floodway to where it ends, and then they even tell me on this one, limit of the floodway.
Would you have to graph that in any way?
You wouldn't have to graph it, but think about what kind of potential, or how can I phrase that in the form of a question? What road is near the limit of the floodway?
Okay.
Oh, it's at the intersection of Limerick Drive and what is that? I forget.
O'Hara House.
Yeah, whatever the road name is there, O'Hara or something. That may be the question.
Intersection of.
Yeah. Think about a lot of these are turned into real world scenarios. Like, you get the person that says, hey, I own a house right at the intersection of Limerick Drive and the Rocky River. How close am I to the floodway? And you could say, hey, you're within 500 feet of the floodway.
You're in it.
Yeah, it's being able to, yeah, you're in it. It's being able to read those parameters in the big picture. What else is unique about this? What unique features would we say about Cobb Brook right here? Well, something is, wow, why does the river stop right here? Oh, it's in a culvert. That's obviously not a natural feature. That's something that's been humanly created, but those are the things that we can identify. So why doesn't Chris Drive appear on the profile? There's Chris Drive. Remember our profile, we saw all those other roads. Why doesn't Chris Drive appear on the profile?
It's in county.
No. If a road appears on the profile, remember we talked about bridges, what does a bridge typically mean? Right, it's got to cross it. If the road does not cross the river, it's not going to be in the profile. And let's see what I mean by that. So I've taken this profile, and I've combined them on the 2 pages. This is Glebe, Wartongue, Oaks, and Argyle. That's the same profile, just compared it with the map. So when I look, I could say, okay, so there's the confluence. That's our reference point, only because they showed it on the profile, and I know the confluence is what? Where 2 rivers meet.
Waterways or
2 waterways, yeah. I mean, it could be streams, rivers, yeah. And then there's Glebe Way. So on my map, I see Glebe Way. That crosses it. There's the bridge and the culvert of Glebe Way. There's Wartongue Way. And there's Oaks up there. So as I'm moving this direction, I'm going left to right. The reason Chris Drive is not on there is Chris Drive does not cross Rocky River. Every one of these is the respective bridge for these crossings. And what did I say? I can tell you what the elevation of the bridge, both the bottom of the bridge and the road surface of the bridge is. That's fair game for somebody asking you a question on that. What's the road height elevation at Oaks Drive? I should be able to read that and tell you what that is. Is that going to be in the floodway data table?
No.
I'm going to have to take that directly from the profile. Does everybody see where I'm going with some of these? I know some of these are the off-the-wall things, but you got to think about what you're going to see. Some of these are going to be off-the-wall questions.
But you're going to have upstream and downstream questions. So basically, you're moving upstream as you go up the map, and your elevations are increasing. So obviously, the flow goes top to bottom in the profile.
Correct. That's not 100% always true, but on this map it is.
Based on what we're
Yeah,
seeing.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, you're exactly right. Seeing what you're seeing with the numbers, with the elevations, yeah, that's a very good assumption. You just have to look at your map for 3 or 4 minutes and be able to determine that before you say, okay, that's how it is in this instance.
And that's a stream running into a bigger area down.
Correct. Here, it's what was it, Cobb Brook running into Rocky River. Does everybody feel comfortable with those kind of things? I mean, we can definitely talk about it more. I'm going to jump ahead now and talk about the administrative and legislative part of how all this came to be.
I have a question for you, Mike.
Sure.
How do you determine the height of the road or the bridge? You go to the bottom?
Let's look at that. So there's my profile.
Bottom of the top of the eye.
So if I say there's, what is that, Oaks Drive.
Yeah.
So if I ask you what the height of the bottom of the bridge is on Oaks Drive, these are the elevation numbers in feet.
Okay.
So there's zeros, so I would count up, there's 5, and then I'd go whatever it is, 5, 6, 7. It's like 6 point something by counting the boxes.
Take the bottom of the eye, go all
To
the
the
way
base. And that, somebody's gonna have to define that. Or they'd say, what's the road height at Oaks Drive? Well, the road height then is essentially the top of the bridge.
Every 2 boxes is 1 also. Is that what
Yeah, on this one, every 2 boxes is 1. It's not always that way.
Right.
That's based on what the elevation, what the y-axis is.
It's like down here.
So Mike, you're saying that we could get a question like find the base flood on Chris Drive, but we can't find it because it is not going over the river. We can't find it on the flood
On the flood data table.
data table.
Right, so like if I said, what was a base flood elevation for Chris Drive on the floodway data table, you can't answer that because Chris Drive doesn't cross the floodway. It doesn't cross the river, it doesn't
So
cross
the
the
answer
floodway.
that it would be looking for is can't be found because it does
Right,
not
I mean,
cross
so
the
you could,
floodway.
the answer to that may be this information cannot be determined because it's not in the floodway.
Gotcha.